one more presentation on this chapter. Um, so apart from protein or peptide hormones, we also have a group of hormones known as amino acid derivatives. Amino acid derivatives, basically modified amino acids, and we have them called catecholamines and indolamines. And these are amines that have a catechol group or an indole group attached to them. A catechol group or an indole group, and that's catechol spelled like that, or indole spelled like that, attached to them. They're typically synthesized by the adrenal medulla and by neurons, okay, by the adrenal medulla and their neurons. And so the norepinephrine, epinephrine, dopamine, and catecholamine are catecholamines, and then we have serotonin and melatonin and indolamines. Quick question for you: do you know which organ or which gland produces melatonin? Okay, please find that out. And where are serotonin and dopamine produced? That's going to be an exam question for you. So think about that. So just like uh, uh, peptide and proteins, they're also stored in secretory vesicles. They may be hydrophilic or and also may be bound to proteins. And they typically signal through adrenergic receptors. They have a short half-life and they're typically inactivated by intracellular enzymes and excreted in urine. Okay, and this is important. So, tyrosine and tryptophan are the precursors to catecholamines and indolamines. Tryptophan is the precursor to indolamines, and tyrosine is the precursor to catecholamines. And for clearance, monoamine oxidase is an enzyme that typically degrades catecholamines and indolamines. Okay, so here you can see catecholamines and our indolamines. Here's a catecholamine, and there's indole group. Oh, sorry, catechol group. Sorry, and an indole group. Right, and like I said, it's mostly produced by the adrenal glands. Here, the epinephrine and norepinephrine, examples of catecholamines, are produced by the adrenal medulla. Here is a synthesis of catecholamines. I will not spend so much time asking you this, but you can see that catecholamines are synthesized from the precursor tyrosine, and then tyrosine can be synthesized into dopa, which is a precursor for dopamine, and then dopamine can be is a precursor to norepinephrine, which is a precursor to epinephrine. If you took an endocrinology class or a cell biology class with me, we will talk more about this. But please remember at least the major catecholamines along this pathway. Okay, and then we have our indolamines, which are usually synthesized from tryptophan, and then tryptophan can be synthesized into serotonin, and then serotonin can be synthesized into melatonin. You remember those three: tryptophan, serotonin, and melatonin. So last but not the least, we're going to talk about steroid hormones. Steroid hormones. So just like protein hormones and catecholamines and indolamines, steroid hormones are an abundant group of hormones, very abundant group of hormones made in the adrenal cortex and made in the gonads and other organs, other glands and cells. And steroid hormones typically have they're made from from fatty acids, and then they have what we call a cyclopen. I'll say that again. Cyclopentanoperhydrophenanthrene ring. Wow, that's a mouthful. And so that's just this four rings right here. These four rings right here. And then, and I do not expect you to remember that name. So they all have the backbone, the same backbone. These four rings, they have cholesterol as their backbone, all of them. Okay, and examples are estrogens, progestins, androgens, and corticosteroids, and also vitamin D. These are your steroid hormones. So let's talk about some of the characteristics of steroid hormones. Steroid hormones are derived from the enzymatic modification of cholesterol by hydroxylations, hydrogenations, and breakage of carbon-carbon bonds. So every single steroid hormone is derived in one form or the other from cholesterol. They are lipophilic, which means they are friendly with fats and oils, and they cannot be stored in vesicles. So these guys are not regulated at the level of secretion, they are regulated at the level of synthesis. Regulated at the level of synthesis. This simply means that when you need um, a steroid hormone, it gets synthesized. Okay, rather unlike protein hormones, when you need it, you just go to the vesicles that have them stored and you get some, right? But in this case, when you need a steroid hormone, you have to synthesize them because they're not stored in vesicles. And they're typically transported in the blood bound to transport proteins, which means what for their half-life? Think about it. What would happen to the half-life if you have them bound to transport proteins? Unlike protein hormones, they also signal through intracellular receptors and not transmembrane receptors. They signal through intracellular receptors and not transmembrane receptors. So here is cholesterol, and cholesterol can be used to synthesize estradiol, progesterone, cortisol, testosterone, aldosterone. Okay, and these table right here shows your major steroid hormones. And steroid hormones, as you can see, are highly involved in a lot of effects in things in the body, including stress regulation and reproduction, growth and development. All right. And so the table here shows where it is synthesized and the receptor that they act through. One cool thing I'm going to talk to you about later when it comes to these steroid hormones is how they sometimes can crosstalk. And so a hormone can bind to a receptor of another steroid hormone. And I have that right here. So crosstalk happens amongst receptor types. So sometimes you can have a mineralocorticoid like aldosterone signaling through a glucocorticoid receptor like a cortisol receptor and vice versa. Okay, cholesterol is the precursor for all steroid hormones, and it is first converted to a hormone precursor called pregnenolone. Pregnenolone is common to all steroid hormones, just like cholesterol is common to all steroid hormones. Steroid hormones are regulated at the level of uptake, storage, and mobilization of cholesterol. Um, the availability of cholesterol is important in the synthesis and regulation of steroid hormones, and they are not, I repeat, they are not stored in vesicles. The mode of mechanism of steroid hormones is through gene transcription, regulation of gene transcription, and I believe that is on the next slide. So here we have the action of a steroid hormone. A steroid hormone easily diffuses across the membrane because it is lipophilic. And if you remember, our membrane is what? Yes, you got it right. It's a phospholipid bilayer. So our steroid hormone easily passes through this bilayer into the cell. And when it gets into a cell, it binds to a receptor. Now, in this picture, you will see that the receptor is bound to what we call a HSP, which is a heat shock protein. The function of this heat shock protein is to prevent the is to act as a chaperone to the receptor, keeps it inactive, but also keeps it from wandering away in a manner of speaking. So our steroid hormone binds to the receptor, dissociating it from the heat shock protein, and now the receptor hormone complex then goes into the nucleus through the nuclear pore, where it acts as a transcription factor. And transcription factor, remember, transcription is DNA to RNA. So, which means that these this hormone receptor complex can either lead to activation of RNA sequencing or prevent it. It can activate or deactivate DNA to RNA. It's a transcription factor. And oftentimes, a lot of them do what we call a dimerization. You have two receptor hormone complexes here binding to the DNA, dimerizing and binding to the DNA, leading to an effect of transcription. And this transcription can then ultimately lead to translation and the formation of a protein product. So please do understand the differences between steroid hormones and protein hormones, their manner of action. Okay, now steroid hormone receptors are also called nuclear family receptors. Now, they're not always found in the nucleus, but they may be found in the cytoplasm, but they have their actions within the nucleus. Recently, we've also come to understand that some steroid hormones have non-genomic action. So non-genomic action. So they may occasionally may act through membrane receptors. And we've seen this with estrogen in rat brain. And so they may also stimulate what we call second messenger systems, which we will talk about in detail later. We have a fourth group of hormones called iodothyronines. Iodothyronines. Iodothyronines are your thyroid hormones. We have T3 and T4, triiodothyronine or tetraiodothyronine or thyroxine. And these are made by the coupling of iodinated tyrosine residues through an ether linkage. So they're also made from tyrosine, but the key word here is iodinated. Okay, so now thyroxine regulates a lot of effects within the body. In fact, there's almost no activity within the body that thyroid hormone is not involved in. So these are very important group of hormones that we will be talking about later. Okay, I think we've come to the end of our lecture today. Please, I've written a few words here that I want you to remember, study, find the meaning, and please study the chapter. Let me add a few more words to it, and I think I already mentioned it. Pleiotropy. Please find the meaning of that. And I think we are good to go. Thank you very much for your